Thomas, can you tell where we got the inspiration for the screen?
I'm assuming it's just like Jackass.
Yes.
That's what it looks like.
Right? Or the FBI warning, but probably Jackass.
It's Jackass.
It looked like Jackass. Warning, the stunts you are about to see are performed by trained professionals.
Right.
Please don't attempt to recreate anything you see on the show. Look at that. I swear, dudes be trying to hack my PayPal 24/7. I'll be getting messages like, this is your code.
All right, let's get started. The conversations in this podcast are performed by the Caveman. For your safety and the protection of those around you, please do not attempt to take anything you hear too seriously on the show. Shout out to Chef. He reads that way better than me.
Yeah, he got that shit down pat. He sounds just like a teleprompter.
What's good, everybody? Welcome back to the Cave. It's me, Joe Reezy. I'm here with O Reez, bringing you another episode of the Cave Podcast. But before we begin, if you're watching live, check out the comments for the Cave Discord link if you want to join a community filled with crazy ass people like you and me 24/7. But if you're watching this later and want to join, then you can find the link on our website, cave.com. Click the Patreon button and you're there. So today we got the controversial, the creative Thomas, aka Paranoid American, on the show. What's good, Thomas? How are you?
What's good, guys? I'm doing all right, man. I'm excited. I got a bunch of shit going on as always.
Yeah, man. And got a bunch of shows going on. And you got a comic coming out as well, right?
Always. I mean, you could ask me that question for the next year and a half, and the answer is always going to be yes. I got one out now, and I got one coming out soon, and I got one that just dropped a month ago. That'll hopefully be my answer anytime you ask me that.
So what's special about your niche of content is, like I said earlier on the show, in the intro, it's controversial because it's conspiracy themed, right?
Yeah, I walk the edge a little bit.
I feel like you have to, I feel like real creativity is controversial, right? What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, I've heard, and I don't really agree with this one, but I've heard that it's like any kind of artwork that's not controversial is essentially propaganda. But I guess all artwork could also sort of be propaganda. But if it's not controversial, it's almost like why do you even need freedom of speech unless you're doing something that might push the line a little bit, and not just in the intent to push people around, but to actually make somebody think and maybe even break somebody's mindset sometimes. That's kind of my like deep down goal, is that I can attract you with like silly cartoons and fun jokes and then question reality at the end of it, or question your allegiance or your loyalty to the things that you've held dear, like any, idol worship and hero worship, nationalism, anything. It's kind of the underlying goal, is to just make you question it for a split second.
Yeah, I feel like propaganda has evolved, though. I feel like right now they're kind of turning up the controversy a little bit just to get engagement from people, to kind of, get a feel of the temperature of the crowd.
Yeah, that shit sells, man.
Yeah.
This shit catches fire.
I had this theory, and I mean, I'm sure there are people that have talked about like bots out there probably just auto comment like controversial things to get shit stirred up. So you can have a crowd going on,
Oh yeah. Yeah. All that AI shit that's popping up now too, man.
Yeah. Those fucking Twitter profiles with the egg profiles, profile pictures.
It's so easy though. Like you don't even need the egg avatar anymore. Like it would be a child's play if you knew what you were doing in an afternoon to set up a bot that would generate a real looking person, maybe 12, maybe 40 different photos of them in different environments and outfits with the same person, and then pre-generate a bunch of posts and schedule a post on all the different social media networks, and even like at people and have it listen for controversial phrases and then just hop into the conversation with like AI generated phrases. Like all that is incredibly simple right now, and a lot of people are already doing it. It's what gets weird though is that there'll be like an AI influencer that everybody knows is AI, and they'll still be influenced by him, and they'll still follow him and retweet and interact.
Oh yeah.
Even though
they'll fuck around.
Simulation, right?
Yeah.
Some people fuck around, act like he's real and shit. You know, like I
Hey,
seen
some of them be bad though. I mean, I can't blame them. I seen some like AI model on Twitter, and I had to do a double take. I'm like, yo, that kind of looks fake, bro. But shit.
Shit, I had a conversation with this girl at the club maybe like a few weeks ago. She was telling me, this is a conversation with my cousin actually, and she was telling me that one of her coworkers, like she's like this high end, like high executive position lady, right? I don't quote me on what position she has, but she's high.
Bitch.
She's high, yeah. She's a boss bitch, right? Quote unquote boss bitch, and she's kind of up there in age. You know what I'm saying? Women age like milk, men age like wine. You know how the saying goes. But she up there, right? And she's posting photos, AI generated photos of her on her LinkedIn and shit, bro. Like that's like her default picture and shit. And like my cousin's like, we know you don't look like that. Like, what are you doing?
But everyone's doing it. Take a look at the latest features that are coming out on iPhone and Samsung and everything, where you take a photo of the outdoors, right? And then there's like something gets in the way, and you can just kind of scrub it out, or maybe the lighting wasn't great. It was like low light, so it can use AI. One of the popular ones is people that do star photography, or they want to take pictures of the moon and stuff. That it'll take a picture of the moon, but then it'll send that picture off into AI land, and it'll be identified. And it's like, oh, this person was trying to take a picture of the moon, and here's the composition, and here's where it's at, and here's all the details they were trying to get. And then AI generates the real photo of the moon, so to speak, and sends that back. And the person is none the wiser, right? To them, they just took a picture, and they're like, oh my God, look how great my photography's gotten. Like, all the practice has been paying off. And that happens with people's faces. Like, you'll take a picture, and some of the features now that are coming out, if you got a group of people, there's like 12 people there, you're going to get someone that's coughing or like looking away or like closing their eyes when the photo goes off. So the AI will just like, oh, we'll just replace those eyeballs real quick. We'll just make them look open. And what it's going to do, though, is going to normalize the fact that you'll take a selfie of yourself and look at it, and it's almost like a messed up mirror. Or imagine like if mirrors that people start putting in their homes just automatically put like nice little AI filters.
Damn.
To the point where like nobody knows what anyone actually looks like anymore until you actually meet in person for the first time. Like imagine this, you're never going to be able to see your own face, right? Without a mirror or without someone taking a picture of it and showing it back to you. So unless it's like a straight up analog mirror, in the near future, right?
It's not you.
You'll never be able to trust any picture of you unless it's like an analog photo.
Yo, this is some end times revelation shit,
Black
bro.
Mirror shit, bro.
Yeah, man. Because then once all that biotech starts getting integrated, bro, your eyes is gonna be integrated into in the system. The software gonna be running through your motherfucking head. Everything that you see, you're gonna have to question that shit.
Can you imagine like locking your face behind a paywall and just kind of baiting your body, and then if you want to see the face, you got to pay for the OnlyFans type shit,
Bro, I've seen that's like no, for real. Like they blur your shit gets blurred. They have something like that going on in one of the episodes of Black Mirror where the motherfucker can't see. He cannot see.
He got in trouble, so yeah, they blocked his image or something from the rest of society. I think that was what happened, but.
It's going to be like the movie Shallow Hal, where the guy gets hypnotized by Tony Robbins in order to like see just all women as beautiful. Like he wants to just trick himself into doing this. But that's going to be the norm, I think. Like it could very easily become the norm. Not only if everyone's wearing the stupid little glasses or the helmets, but like once it evolves to the point where it's seamless, like you don't even have to get surgery. You just put like a little thing on the back of your neck with like a sticker, you know what I mean? So you can just peel it off when you don't want it. Once they got something like that can just trigger your optic nerve, it's just going to be, people are going to put their own skins on you, right? Like if I talk to you, I'm going to be like, I'm going to decide you're going to be the Joker today. And like, there's nothing you can do about it. And it's just for me, but that'll also be just kind of become this new norm. Where I get to decide what you look like. You don't even I can change your voice. I can do all sorts of things.
What if I associate as Batman?
Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't
But
matter.
yeah, he could put it on.
fucking
He
with
could put it on
you.
private. He could put it on private, so you don't know. You know, there's
Yeah,
some certain privacy settings.
that offends me as Batman. That offends me.
Hey, that won't be bad. Like at 2 a.m. after the club. You know what I mean?
So you could literally do it for every single person in your life, and even strangers. You could just make them so they pop up as like a random person. You could just generate them like GTA characters.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that anyone would sit down and actually want to do this, but the fact that it not only is it possible, but it seems like it's on the same road that we're currently on. Like it's on the trajectory. It's just like one exit away at some point, right?
Oh yeah,
Well,
we
I
have
think-
few
I think
off ramps from that shit.
Right. Well, I think the first step is VR and the headsets, right? And then I think augmented reality is the next step, and then third is Neuralink and some kind of transhumanism procedure. You know.
They gotta finish. They gotta finish it off. They gotta finish it off with quantum computing. That's going to bring it all full circle. The quantum computing leaps that they make. Because everything's going to tie into that. You know what I mean? Because that's basically going to be the foundation for all these things. Because of quantum computing, I'm gonna be able to have my Yu-Gi-Oh! Dual disc, and I'm gonna be able to freaking duel people with real monsters behind me attacking. You know what I'm saying? Like like quantum computing is going to change.
That Pokemon Go programming, bro. That's what they roll that out for.
Yep, it's gonna change everything, but it's gonna happen so fast because Elon Musk said it best, man. Like we just keep rolling out these products, bro, but we don't run no trials on them, and we don't do no in-depth research on them to see how it's gonna affect us in the long run. You know what I'm saying? Like we don't even know. We barely just have research now popping up on social media how it affects the mind, or like how porn affects the mind. We're barely scratching the surface when it comes to that. So just imagine when quantum computing pops up and we integrate everything with it. You know what I mean? It's going to be a beast.
I think they low key know. They just don't put it out there. Obviously, they've had to like do some studies and run some experiments to find out how to tinker with whatever they're working on. Have you seen the movie Megan?
Megan.
Yeah. It's like the new wave of Child's Play. Like Megan was kind of the new Chucky. Like
Cyborg
I'm
Chucky.
still on the fence about what I feel about Megan. I think I liked it because there were some practical effects involved.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just bring it up because
the AI dolls become alive.
Yeah, well, the fact that she was kind of pressured to release it prematurely. I think that's the case a lot of times when we see these flukes.
But see, if you don't when we're talking about high technology and you're talking like quantum computing and everything, the problem is that there's never going to be, in my cynical opinion, there's never going to be like a global consensus when all the tech moguls of all the different countries in the world all decide like, you know what? Yeah, let's just hold off. Let's do some trials.
Oh yeah, no, exactly my point.
So like, the second that you get half the world to agree to like, hit the brakes a little bit, then China starts doing it. Or like
I was just about to say that shit.
Right? So we're just gonna be in a perpetual arms war because that's kind of what it is, right? Like, all technology sort of amounts to things you can use to destroy somebody else. So I think that there's never going to be a point when everyone's not competing to have slightly better technology than everybody else. And then by proxy, like you're going to have to adopt that technology just to stay in the game. Otherwise you start getting looked at like a third world country and then no one even invites you anywhere anymore. You know what I mean?
Kind of like the nuclear
like the global version of like the people that get upset because your texts don't come in the same color because they got an iPhone and you got an Android or whatever. Like that happens at the global like geopolitical scale.
That's nuts.
I mean, simple things like that, but it will translate into bigger issues for sure.
Well, you are not shy from using technology like AI and all that. Would you get Neuralink?
No, I would never. I mean, I don't like to get my blood drawn. Like, I don't like surgery or needles, or I just can't imagine that when something enters my body, like you're gonna leave it better than when you found it, unless like I'm already dying or there's like something that's so wrong that it's worth that risk. But as just like a normal, healthy human being, to do like an elective surgery of that sort of magnitude feels a little crazy. I understand some of the first people though were like quadriplegics or like people that were paralyzed or have other major issues, so that I mean they're not. I mean I don't know a better way to phrase it. They're not putting it like all on the line. That's, for some of them, they're looking at it like this could drastically improve their life.
Right.
from like a slightly different baseline than like a normal person. I think that the next real big step is going to be the non-invasive version of this. So right now, everyone's, down with Neuralink because it's kind of creepy and they actually have to surgically implant nodes in your brain. But again, what if it's just like a sticker that you just put on this? It's like one of those when you go on a boat and you won't want to get sick, they have like the little things you put behind your ear or something, or like a little magnet you put on your wrist. Like, what if it's that simple that you just put an Apple Watch on and now all of a sudden it knows how to vibrate your optic nerve and make you see things and trigger your olfactory? Like, what if it could do all that and you could just take it on and off like it was a hat? Like, that would be way harder for people to resist and call Mark of a Beast.
Oh, yeah.
You could just take it off your head, you know what I mean? Or whatever the equivalent of that would be.
I mean, I'm in already, and it reminds me, and it brings everything all together. It brings everything all together, what we're talking about. That Black Mirror episode where they had that chip or that little like sticker. It was not really an implant, but it looks like an Apple AirTag that they kind of put in their temple.
It's not that far off, man, because they have medication now, right? That used to require like an actual intravenous or like
those patches,
a real needle. Yeah, and now they got little patches that have like micro needles in them, and that like it's still technically needles, like it's still going into your system, but they're just so tiny and there's so many of them that it's not the same experience. And once you can basically sell that, like PR that, oh, it's just a sticker, you know what I mean? You don't market it as thousands of microscopic needles. Like, you would just call it a sticker. And then all of a sudden people are like, oh, I like stickers. And then they just put it on. So I really think that we're not that far away, like not even maybe like a decade or something. I'm not making like prophecies here, but it just seems like a very natural evolution, especially if Neuralink ends up, being popular enough to be profitable right away, or things like it, because then it's just going to be a race to make it more convenient, smaller, and then just loading it up with features. And then there's always going to be like tipping point. Like, imagine right now not having a smartphone at all, on principle, or not having any social media accounts at all. Like, if you said that 20 years ago, some people would be like, oh, that's fine, you can not have social media accounts. But now it's like you turn into a pariah, and it also makes your life a little bit harder. It makes you stand out like the shooter, or if there's like some news.
You don't get no girls for you.
Yeah, exactly.
No girls.
Yeah, you become kind of like a red flag by not participating in what everybody else is doing. So again, once it hits that tipping point, people will be like, why don't you have the sticker on? Like, that's weird. Like, everyone's got the sticker, and that's not far-fetched. It's exactly what happens with every single trend.
Man, I just read this article about the possibility of universal income being a real thing. And in order to implement that, you need a digital ID. And that's kind of the bridge for some kind of social credit.
Well, you don't need it. I mean, it would be highly inefficient and people would scam the system just like they scam it now. But it's weird when people say like, oh, well, in order for it to work, because UBI is going to be like communism in a way where even if they try it, I don't see any way it can succeed for numerous reasons. So UBI is always going to be that thing that's like, well, if they would have done it right, it would have worked. I really feel that that's kind of the direction it's headed.
Man, well, this conversation was sprouted by AI accounts, and they used to be the egg profile, but they've turned into these like anime profiles now, right? And just profile pictures. I mean, like these anime manga profile pictures. And
I can't tell if they AI or minors. They need to take these fucking photos off, man. For real.
I think that's the purpose of that. I mean, it's pretty crazy. But just to kind of get back into the comic conversation, Thomas, are you a fan of anime or manga as a comic book connoisseur?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't found myself getting into like the big popular ones, but I like some of the horror. I like some of the horror manga, and I like some of the classic anime. I gotta admit that I don't fall directly into like the Dragon Ball Z and Pokemons, and I don't think any like long-lived series. I haven't watched every single one, but I do know that I changed my mind about how much I liked anime when I saw Akira, Ninja Scroll, and I think like when Princess Mononoke came out, for whatever reason, I ended up watching that. So like, I know I got some anime love in me. I've never even seen or heard of Berserk before.
Oh, you a fucking
I like Death Note. I like that one a lot.
So yeah, you're naming all the really like grotesque ones. So all of those ones kind of take inspiration from Berserk, man. Berserk is the one, bro. Like if you want to see like the epitome of man at his most carnal nature, then yeah, you read that shit.
Okay, all right, I'll check out Berserk then.
Yeah, that shit's like Game of Thrones on crack, bro.
Yo, not until you've seen Ghost in the Shell.
Oh, that's sick too, bro. Ghost in the Shell
Dog.
sick too, bro.
I'm
I
late.
know
I'm
I've
late
seen
on
it,
anime.
Although it always felt like it was bundled with Akira, or it was always like held next to Akira for whatever reason.
I totally see that.
So I don't know if it's like stupid to do this, but I always have like compared it to Akira in so many ways. And anytime, I know I've seen both of them numerous times, but at any point, if there's like, hey, let's put on Ghost in the Shell, I would just think like, let's put on Akira. You know what I mean?
I think the art style is kind of similar, and the kind of like cyberpunk-esque approach is similar, but definitely the storylines are different because Akira is more about like psychics and biology, and then Ghost in the Shell is more like the Matrix.
You're right.
Like,
you're right. And I think that when it comes to animation and cartoons and stuff, again, my own personal bias here, but I've never been as much of a fan of like Transformers as I was a G.I. Joe. For example, like I really like the organic look of, you know, people versus mechs and machines and industrial stuff. Ghostbusters was probably like one of my biggest jams, and you don't really see a lot of mech and stuff in like the Ghostbusters kind of like, I like, you know, pulsating veins and goo and, you know, heads exploding with like all the little bits coming out. That's always been big. I guess that's also why I like Ninja Scroll so much.
Well, Ninja Scroll is lit, bro. For sure. Ninja Scroll is lit.
If you want to pass on Ghost in the Shell, you should watch Perfect Blue. That shit fucking started this whole anime.
I haven't seen it yet. I know it's been recommended to me a number of times, so it's at the top of my list.
So I mentioned anime because I hated anime. I thought I was faking gay until I started like going down this Dragon Ball Z occult rabbit hole. And bro, it's crazy how old anime is. It came out like there's a lot of, like Berserk was written in the 80s, right? Oh,
It's pretty fucking old, man. It's older than
and I bring it up with you because as far as your content goes, like being controversial, anime was actually pretty controversial coming up because when it was adopted by America, it was around like the late 90s, and because it was animated, they automatically thought it was for kids, right? And so they adopted Dragon Ball into like one of the Cartoon Networks. I don't think Cartoon Network, but one of the Cartoon Networks, not knowing that there were scenes where Goku was like straight up checking if Bulma had a dick or not, because they hadn't seen girls before, you know,
smacking her pussy and shit.
Yeah, and they didn't know that like anime was a way to kind of bypass shit that they couldn't depict in films and kind of put it in animation form. So it's kind of in line with what you're doing. You know what I mean?
You seen how raunchy some of them Looney Tunes episodes used to get? You know what I mean? And then you compare it to like Dragon Ball, like old Dragon Ball, like on one of the first episodes, fucking Goku used his power pole, extended his power pole all the way to the moon, and then dropped his adversaries off on the moon. They were stranded on the moon. Like that's some Looney Tunes shit. So I mean, like Japan in their own little special way was trying to recreate that. That's what I think. Because if you look at One Piece, old One Piece was super cartoony, like super loony. You know, I could definitely see him like in an episode with like Tom and Jerry or some shit, like, or like fucking the Coyote and the Roadrunner, you know, just running around Luffy and shit like that. So like the way the animation styles back then were a lot more goofy, and you could put like subliminal jokes in there. You know what I'm saying? So, and you know, Japan, they're like overt with their shit. So
yeah, they be over the top sometimes, like not even trying to hide it, almost highlighting it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You think about it this way too, though, that cartoons and animation is it was the only format for hundreds of years, for the last century, basically. That if you wanted to do something crazy, if you wanted to show somebody flying up to the moon and dropping someone off and flying back, you might be able to patch that together with some practical effects and stuff. But for the most part, you were going to be limited to drawing that out and making it look as good as you could. And then once people started trying to make it look realistic, they realized that when you watch something like animation, you've already forfeited all of your expectations of realities. So while you can get it to look kind of realistic, it works just as well if it's just like cell shaded, colors, like bright, colorful anime style that don't have like all the intricate detail and shading and all that. You don't need all of that to convey the message. So after a while, after 100 years of that being the only real medium that you can do all these things, yeah, you've got really adult concepts, because not just kids want to think about dropping people off on the moon or anything, like huge explosions and even today, this is my favorite thing about the comic medium is that if I wanted to make a whole planet explode and then zoom in and show it from all these different angles and then have like a huge tank shooting lasers and stuff, I mean, I would just have an artist or I would draw all that stuff out. It's not going to take a different budget than if I was drawing a bunch of dudes sitting around in an office building just having a conversation. So again, with anime and comics and cartoons literally being the only mediums that you could have done those things with until recently. And even now, even if you had a room full of animators, like that costs a lot of money. You know what I mean? Right. It's actually going to start to democratize itself again. And forgive me to pointing back into AI, but now you'll be able to just go into AI and just type out, 1980s Saturday morning cartoon image of a planet exploding, and you'll be able to get that, and you don't need a team of animators.
Well, going back to VR and self-image, I feel like the anime community is one of the front runner demographics for that, because they're into the, over the top self-images and being.
And if you look at a lot of the AI training right now, custom training, I really feel like it's 90% anime and manga and like hentai characters, and the other 10% is like Western stuff of all kinds, cartoon and realistic and everything in between. But there's such a huge anime centric user base of AI. And I think that that's directly related to less regulation. There's nobody in Japan or in China, as much as there is anywhere in the Western world combined, that are saying like, hey, maybe we should pump the brakes on this thing. Everyone else is like, buy more video cards, get on the run faster, buy more fans. You know what I mean? They're like, nobody's pumping the brakes anywhere outside the Western world right now.
As I said before, there's no regulation on product being rolled out. And a result of that is going to be a mass outcry. Something's going to happen.
Man, and you know what? It's funny to bridge this into your comic again. Animation. How come everything fucking... Well, not everything. I mean, we can talk about the moon landing, but do you guys see that that Indian moon landing footage? It looks straight up like an animation or something.
Yeah, it was like a 3D rendering.
Yeah.
Well, that shit.
a lot of space footage is AI too, and animation, CGI.
Oh yeah. A lot of shit that NASA put out is not even like, so like they render that shit.
Every iconic photograph that anyone's ever seen in a textbook or had on a poster on a wall, even if it wasn't just straight up CGI from start to end, a lot of it is pieced together from a lot of different angles and a lot of different interpretations and data until it looks really, really good, to the point where it doesn't actually represent, like in a very symbolic way, it represents the thing, but it's no longer a realistic version of whatever that thing is.
It's a hologram.
You can almost make that argument for everything now, right? Because everything that you see a picture of right now had to go through a chip. Like it's no longer an analog. You're not seeing the impressions made from the photons from the thing that you were looking at. Now everything gets stored in software and it gets processed and compressed and uncompressed. And so, I mean, you can make the argument that nothing, like even the stream that we're looking at right now, right? Like it's like none of that is actually real anymore once it hits like the little digital sensors.
Isn't that what quantum singularities and black holes do though? They take in all light and then they shoot it out through, gamma radiation. So, yeah, man, as above, so below. This is interesting reality that we live in.
Well, it's funny because what first set me down that rabbit hole of AI images from NASA, or not AI images, just Photoshop images from NASA, was, they were Photoshopping UFOs out of the pictures, And then I got into the deeper rabbit hole of space is fake and gay, and everything that you see that NASA puts out is usually AI or CGI of some sort, or some kind of animation. Do you believe the moon landing was fake?
I do. I think that the moon landing was fake, and I think it was because it wouldn't have gone off on a hit. And I'm biased, and there's an opinion of mine, but I just don't trust because of all the different things that add up. The biggest one is deleting the footage on purpose because they had a tape shortage, and they never thought that anyone would want to look at the footage again. Even if it was done on accident, I don't believe it. It's like, man. We didn't check that building for the kid with the rifle. It's kind of like, didn't you? So that is so suspect. But I do think that it's theoretically possible, and I think it might even be likely that human beings have stepped foot on the moon. But I don't believe that the original footage from the 60s that we're talking about, or maybe even any of the Apollo mission footage of people walking around, I'm not convinced that any of it was absolutely real.
Yeah, I'm on board with that too. I feel like they've either gone after, or a part of me even thinks they've gone before and they've been threatened to stay away from there, possibly, But I do think the footage that everyone believes is evidence that we've been on the moon.
Yeah, damn near everything that I see that's televised, I don't trust. So,
right.
And they've been caught doing lies so many different times. There's a famous photo that Joe Rogan used to bring up, but he got off the fake moon landing ship a long time ago, right? But it was one that he brought up all the time. It's very legit, and it had one of the guy. I'm spacing on all the individual names. I think it was. I don't think it was John Collins, but it sounds something like that. But it's basically an image of a dude floating. And this was used all over the place to actually show, like, hey, look, here's an astronaut in zero gravity. Look how cool this is. But there was the real photo from this. Like, this was just taken from kind of a photo op at some point, or they classified it as training. And the original photo, he was like strung up. He had like a whole harness on, and he was being strapped to the ceiling. Like, it's some old school sort of practical effect, right? And it just got old school photoshopped out, like the actual, like somebody painted or airbrushed all the lines out. And the only response to that from NASA was that, oh, well, we never released that as an official photo. But they did airbrush it, and it did get out into the public, and it did become one of the most like de facto referenced images, and it made its way into an actual textbook. So all that is true. The only point of contention is that NASA was like, oh, we just did that for funsies. Like, that was just for our Christmas cards, and no one was supposed to see that one. Yeah. But there's so many other, like, again, it's just like this long list of different things. It's like, oh, that's kind of weird. Okay, that's fine. You deleted the tapes. That makes perfect sense. Oh, you just airbrush photos, but not for mass release, and you don't necessarily like go out of your way to correct it when they go out into the wild. Yeah, that makes sense too. I guess there's nothing really to look into here.
I love where this conversation is going because it ties everything in. Because there's also the theory that Stanley Kubrick was the one who directed the moon landing footage, right? Do you believe in that theory?
I think it's very likely, and I'll give you some of the reasons why. That's why I made a whole comic on this, because I really do think that it's very likely. But when he made Dr. Strangelove movie, I guess this is part of lore legend. I don't know how accurate this is, but this is what it's based on. He makes Dr. Strangelove, and somebody in NSA or someone in the military sees the movie, and they're surprised at how accurate the depiction of like the cockpit of the plane that he's in, the whole mechanics and how they drop the bomb, like just tiny little details that if you're watching the movie, you don't even care. You don't care about what the little dials and all the buttons look like inside this plane. That's not part of it. But I guess it was so damn accurate, in addition to being one of the first green screen examples that was really convincing for the mass audiences. So those two factors, he gets called in and they say, how the hell did you get access to these top secret, plans on this plane. And he basically explained how he had pieced it together from seeing like just tiny little images in a bunch of different magazines and sort of clippings. And he was like, well, if you've got this control here and these controls are here, then you'd probably have, like, he kind of just figured out what the rest of the cockpit would look like. And he was so damn on the money for it that it was almost like, like this guy can piece things together. He's really smart. And if we don't get him on the payroll, there's a chance that somebody else could get him on the payroll. So it would be crazy for us not to make him an ally right now. Like he's like a force to be reckoned with. So that's one aspect of it. And then the other one too was that he was a master at his craft and he clearly could disseminate information. So why wouldn't you want to have this particular person kind of on the payroll in some way? So that's the justification of how he got the job. And then the other aspect is that he was doing 2001 Space Odyssey. So now the idea is if you show the public what to expect space looks like and how zero gravity looks and how people move on the moon when they jump around and all this, you can kind of dictate that by using the media first and set the expectations. So then when they see the real moon landing footage, it can match what their expectations were. And Kubrick was such a damn stickler that I can't tell if he had the opportunity to fake the moon landing just so it would match his movie, so it didn't make it look like his movie was wrong, or if he was just like so genius that he was right about it and it really is like that. You know what I mean? But
yeah.
So I think there's a lot of different reasons that would at least make a compelling case. More than just dismissing it and laughing about it offhand. Like there's actually a there.
What's interesting is if that's true, then that makes his whole disc choreography even more impressive, because one of my favorite movies is obviously Eyes Wide Shut. And he died before that movie came out. So, I like to connect dots, and those dots seem pretty straight on. But I heard this theory, and correct me if I'm wrong if you've heard anything against this, is when he made Dr. Strangelove, he faced a lot of backlash because it was anti-military, anti-US, and it was really controversial. So he almost got canceled for that.
By the military and by the US like officials, but I don't think it was received like that critically. And I think when he first started it wasn't even meant to be a comedy at all. And it kind of evolved into a comedy as he started filming it. And that aspect of it, the fact that it was made to be like they were making fun of it, I almost wonder, like, I kind of think that if he had never turned it into a comedy with obvious like jokes and over the top acting, it might have been received just fine, or at least gone under the radar a lot easier. But the fact that he made it kind of like a caricature of itself, like a parody, that's what drew a lot of criticism, specifically from the military and even like ratings.
I haven't seen the movie in a while too, but weren't the characters inspired by actual people though? Like, wasn't Werner von Braun, Herman Canon, all them kind of loosely depicted?
And it's so integral to conspiracy lore. It's also, I think, one of the first references I've ever come across in popular media about injecting the public water supply with fluoride and able to like control people's minds. That's a really deep conspiracy lore for the time that Dr. Strangelove came out. Like he was like 50 years ahead of his time on that.
So what I heard was because of that, he was kind of the public enemy to the elites, right? And so he obviously struggled with his career, and so he got creative and pulled off 2001 Space Odyssey. And that's when NASA took notice of him and was like, hey, we could use this guy, and hired him for the moon landing project. Have you heard that theory before?
I think it's just as valid as any other ones. That one would have been a little bit late in the game. That one would have supposed that the military was already on track to try and do it, and then it kind of fell short, and they needed Kubrick as a backup plan, as opposed to having him in mind for it from day one. And the implication of those two theories is kind of important, right? Because one of them, like if they hit Kubrick up late in the game, then it's almost as if they really were trying to do it, and there's a better chance that they could do it, but they just didn't know how to film it or something like that. I mean, the new movie Fly Me to the Moon is an example where I think that they're still going there, but they just want it to look good, and they just want to make sure that everything looks great in case something weird happens, right? So that's one aspect of it. But then you've got one like Capricorn 1. This is the movie that had like O.J. Simpson in it. And I think this was like a mission to Mars, not the moon, but it's the same premise. But in this one, they knew before they even were going to launch the rocket, it wasn't going to work, that everyone would die, that some technology was going to fail, but that they couldn't lose face with the American public by saying like, hey, guess what? The last 7 years and all these, billions, and today I guess it would be like trillions of dollars in this program, like, sorry, it didn't work out. All of our no bid partners made lots of profit on it, but rocket's not going to happen. So people weren't going to accept that. So in that case, you would need to hire like the whole thing ahead of time. So that I think that both of those have just as much merit just because they both involve Stanley Kubrick. You know what I mean?
Right.
And if you were in charge and you had an unlimited budget of the government, like, why wouldn't you hire the best person on the planet in order to do this? Like, why would you go to the AV club of a community college? You know what I mean?
I'm saying, like, I just looked this up. The budget for NASA this, I think, 2025 fiscal year, this is the request, is $25.4 billion.
Like, right. And you were 100% right, man, that if you look at a majority of what NASA produces, it's 3D animation. It's not even great 3D animation. Like there's kids in high school right now that are using Unreal Engine that are making things that would put NASA to shame.
I feel like they don't even be doing shit.
And that's their main output.
I feel like they don't even be doing shit. They haven't even made like any major progress for as long as I've been alive. It's kind of retarded.
Well, it's private industry, and that's kind of like the biggest trend ever, though, especially in America, I would say. But that the government poses as like, oh, well, we wouldn't even be going to space. And I'm going to suppose that space is real and it's not faking gay just for the purpose of this. But that it's the government likes to pretend, and NASA, oh, well, if it weren't for us, just there would nothing be going on in space. But really, like a lot of the satellite launches that Elon Musk has been doing with SpaceX, but even like Virgin Galactic with Richard Branson, right? They've had kind of more innovation in terms of at least doing like suborbitable flight technology and making it so that it doesn't cost billions upon billions of dollars. Because that's one of those weird turning points, right? Because they had a place that never amounted to much, but it was called Spaceport America, and it was in New Mexico. And the premise of this thing was that, hey, let's go and get anyone that's got $100,000 or $200,000, I think it was, for one flight. Anyone that's got that kind of money that can just drop $200,000, they'll kind of be like our VIP early adopters that help fund research that figures out how we can make it $50,000. And then once we get enough of those, how do we make it $10,000? And then eventually, how do we make it so it costs $500? So now all of a sudden, if you wanted to do a flight from here to China and you're looking at flight prices, you're like, oh, I could spend $800 on Delta, or, oh, what's this? A suborbital and Virgin Galactic for $900. Right. Yeah, let's try that. Like that's kind of the ultimate goal of like all this. And NASA's not doing that. There's no way that the things that NASA doing currently don't seem to be oriented towards how do we make this like commercially viable for private industry. That's only private industry is going to do that. What NASA's doing is, floating, and I'm just making some of these things up, but like this is based on some real experiments. Like they'll spend like $20 million on like 8 spiders and fly the spiders up into outer space and analyze how they weave their webs. You know what I mean? Which probably has all kinds of interesting merit to it. I think they have found some really cool stuff on there, but I feel like that stuff can happen once it's cheap enough for private industry to go out and figure out how spiders weave their webs. Like we don't need to tell the government, we don't need them to have 20 million to do it, or 20 billion is probably what they would end up costing, right?
That shit sound retarded, bro.
That's real.
Spiders weaving what?
That's how Spider-Man came about, bro.
Fucking Rick and Morty. That sounds like an episode of Rick and Morty. They just sending some spiders out to go fucking weave,
and they'll plant like root vegetables, and they'll check to see how the root system works, because maybe it is not as obvious, but when you plant a plant in space, the roots don't just automatically grow downwards. Like the fact that they grow downwards on Earth is because gravity exists.
I was gonna say that's gravity.
So if you're in zero orbit and you got zero gravity, now all of a sudden the things that you take for granted don't work the same. So they have to like adapt. So those things are really interesting, and they find that there's some ways that insects or plants can thrive in zero gravity and other ways that they don't. Like that's information I think is useful in the long term. But again, like it would be better if they can just get the price down so that normies can figure this stuff out.
Hey, you guys laugh when I say that's where Spider-Man came from, but watch this tie-in real quick. First of all, I will say NASA is smart because they've almost put out the alibi or the excuse that, oh, check out this footage from one of our monitors, and so the CGI could be really shitty because of that preface, I think. And because of the moon landing, they're the fucking top of the heap. So all these Virgin Galactics and all that have to, kind of put their name in the game now and almost shoot for the stars, if you will. You know what I mean? But how important is Jack Parsons in being able to go to the moon, right? And it's interesting because when we talked about Jack Parsons, and it's funny how this conversation just naturally comes about, I just looked up that Jack Parsons, when we did that Jack Parsons deep dive, Jack Parsons' original name was Marvel Whiteside Parsons. And
right,
I thought his story was similar to Dr. Doom's story as well, because at the end of it, his lab exploded, right? And possibly could have been the origin stories for the mask.
I totally think that Jack Parsons is the origin for a lot of Marvel characters. Just like Nikola Tesla is the kind of the archetype for all the mad scientist characters that you see in movies and TV for, a century afterwards.
Right.
But I think that so there's I don't know how accurate this is, but basically there's this story that goes about the 4-minute mile, to where nobody could do a 4-minute mile. They thought for the longest time that it was impossible that any human being could do a 4-minute mile. And then bam, somebody ends up doing a 4-minute mile. I can't remember. I don't think it was Usain Bolt. I think it was older than that. But somebody runs a 4-minute mile, and then all of a sudden the next year, people are breaking that record left and right. So this thing that was held for a long time as being a straight up limitation of human capability, and it was just like, don't even try. Like, why would you even train to break the 4-minute mile if like conventional science tells you it's impossible? Like your body would break down, or it's just not capable of doing it. And then all of a sudden someone does it, and then it's like, oh, well, I guess I can try and train for this thing. And I think Parsons did that too. For the longest time, the things that Parsons wanted to do, people thought it was silly. Like that, none of that would ever work. So he was kind of forced to like prove that it would work on his own in some cases. And as soon as he showed people that he was right and some of these things would work, then all of a sudden people are making more innovations because he kind of broke that bubble. Like he broke this like self-limitation that people had started imposing on them. So I think that Parsons might not represent the ultimate genius of all rocket propulsion. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't necessarily represent everything good that ever happened. Like, oh, that was Parsons. But I do think he was the guy that made people believe that it was possible to do that, which is magic as hell. You know what I mean? Like, I think he would almost prefer that to be his legacy anyways.
You do got to be careful with that shit though, man. Because then, the flip side of that is Ocean Gate.
Well, maybe. I don't know, man. I don't. Well, yeah.
I'm just saying, bro.
Ocean Gate, I think, is a good connection, but also the people that were in that, it seemed like they could have afforded something way better than the little controller. I feel like
they were trying to
nah, I'm not paying this much for that.
They were trying to be innovative, right? That's what it was, right?
Why? Yeah. Why wouldn't you send like a robot down first? Though, right?
Well, just to be fair and use the 4-minute mile example, I'm sure there are people that have fucking gotten heart attacks trying to make that 4-minute mile happen before someone actually did it and was like, I told y'all. You know what I mean?
Think about all the rocket propulsion pioneers that you've never heard of because they literally exploded. You know what I mean? There's probably hundreds and countless people that tried to be Jack Parsons and just they ended up killing themselves. I think he ended up kind of dying too, right?
See,
But he was reached out to by, was it not NASA but the government at first, right?
Well, the JPL, the Jack Parsons Laboratory. So my understanding, and it's a mishmash of like books and articles, and there was a really great TV series called Strange Angel. I don't know if you ever seen it. It's well worth the watch. It's definitely, it ended too soon. It is an amazing series, but the Strange Angel has an interesting approach that seems like it's based in something that would be real, and that's that he never really followed the traditional academic path. So he wasn't accepted as one of the insider guys that had, grown up and went to all the same college classes and went to all the same college dances as everybody else that was in this bubble. He was always like this weird outsider that believed in magic and orgies and stuff. But then that means that, like, if he had a really good idea on this rocket propulsion, he didn't have anybody at all to listen to him, because he was this weird outsider dude. Yeah. So he ends up making friends that are in that inside circle, and then uses like his connections in order to get his ideas tested out and get funding. But it's always like him as this little like side dude. You know what I mean? It'll be like if I knew somebody at NASA and I was like, damn, I know how to make the best rocket, but like they're going to look at me and say, oh, you've got a conspiracy podcast and you do comic books. Like, yeah, we're not going to give you the keys to making rockets. But if I knew somebody and I got them to listen to me and they were like, damn, you might be onto something, you know what I mean? That's a very realistic scenario. And I feel that that's kind of the angle. So it's not that people pulled him in. I think if anything, he had to impose himself in. And then once there was anyone out there that was like, damn, this crazy guy is actually onto something, how can I steal that and make it mine? I think a lot of that probably happened. So like his influence almost ends at the name JPL, to the point where a lot of people don't know who he is, or he's just a trivia note, or they only know about him in context of Aleister Crowley, right? Or they just know about him in terms of rocket propulsion because, they built model rockets as a kid, or they like explosions or something. But it's so crazy that such an interesting person that had such a huge impact on history isn't like, how come we didn't learn about that dude in middle school? How come no one had to memorize, Jack Parsons? Well, it's because they probably don't want you looking into that he was like Satan worshiping and summoning demons in the desert with L. Ron Hubbard, and like
because all that shit connects to dark magic and shit anyway. Like so that's why they don't put that shit in any of the history books. That's why. And then, they have this new movement where they're trying to take the Pledge of Allegiance out of the schools and all that. And then they're trying to put it back in and all, there's always been this tug of war on, how spiritual are we going to get with educating people, right? Because they'll feed you the information, but they'll leave out the whole spiritual aspect. You learn the spiritual aspect of it later. You're like, wait a minute, so that's through my experience. That's what I've seen.
I think those ones are like the easy setup. So, for example, the Pledge of Allegiance in school, I feel like that's such a contrived fake controversy so that the two sides can lob that one back and forth. So then once, groceries go 4x in price and people start getting angry about the groceries, they'll be like, oh, we're working on the grocery prices, but check this out. We got the Pledge of Allegiance back in schools. You know what I mean? And then when something else bad happens, they can just kind of keep volleying these like really easy setups that don't really require anything other than some kind of decree. It's like the like just declare bankruptcy by screaming it out loud, Michael Scott style. That's kind of what some of these controversies are.
The distractions, more or less.
Easy ones though, that people legitimately care about and get swept up in.
Yeah.
Man, yeah, this is getting interesting because before I get off Jack Parsons, you're right. I think he made his connections in college. That's when he started kind of, networking and teamed up with the acclaimed Suicide Squad, right? Which I also hypothesized could have been the inspiration for the name Suicide Squad in DC. But I wouldn't be surprised if someone was just like, dude, fuck this guy. I don't have all that sex magic, rumors tied into me. I'm just going to take the credit for all this research. And right now is probably still running NASA low
Yeah,
key.
they Rosa Parked them, right? Didn't they have like another chick that was gonna do the Rosa Parks thing, but she had like a couple problematic things. Someone in a boardroom was like, yeah, but look at this. Like, we're gonna have to pass on her because if this thing comes out, it's just not as ad. We can't sell as much Coca-Cola if this comes out. So let's get the next person on. I feel that JPL was that guy that someone was like, we can't sell as much Coca-Cola if they find out about the orgies, you know?
Mm-hmm. Hell yeah, I agree with that. Subscribe to that. Do you subscribe to the theory that NASA means to deceive in Hebrew and all that, and that was kind of the reasoning or the purpose of the name NASA?
I don't believe so. I don't think that was the original intent, but I have come around on this premise that when somebody else finds meaning in something, even if the person that made it doesn't think they put that meaning in there, I think that there's a chance that it's still there. So even if they didn't mean for it to line up like that, if the fact that anything does line up, now it does have that meaning. Like, it's just how I think my logic usually works. I don't believe.
Yeah, that's interesting that he's saying, and kind of to tie into the whole comic and the manga stuff. So there's a character in a manga called Bleach, and Bleach is like kind of it shows how Grim Reapers interact with souls, right? And so one of the Grim Reapers is this really, really, really old one, man, like a really ancient one of the first ones. And one of his abilities is basically his weapon is a brush. It's like a paintbrush, and he can rename things and rename people. And as he renames things and renames people, he changes the attributes of that thing or that person. So he renamed one of his opponents an ant. He says, "You're no more than an ant," and so he was easily able to squash him. So just like the whole concept of like renaming things, and they have the whole God spoke the universe into existence. Everything is vibration. String theory, everything is a string that's just vibrating, and then everything that's vibrating off the string is manifesting into matter. Like, this we're onto something, you know what I'm saying?
I've also been pondering and kind of thinking about and subscribing to the idea that no one has any original ideas, right? Like, these are just kind of like, if you've thought that you've came up with an original idea, you probably just attracted a thought that no one's tuned into, you know what I mean, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So in order to get the meaning, like to find meaning in something, that kind of lines up with someone actually putting the meaning there to begin with, or whether that's in this time frame or some other time in space. So they change meanings too, because look at the swastika. The swastika changed its meaning changed over time as well. So I mean, is depending on the perspective of those people in that generation, they dictate what reality is.
And dude, the swastika is a crazy example because there's modern research now that they're basically creating. I'm going to get some of this wrong, but this is like and you can look it up, but the general premise is that they have these nanoparticles that they've created that are in the shape of swastikas. They call it gamadians. And these little gamadians that are made of these nanoparticles, they can actually themselves create gold nanoparticles. So, and this is like, God. I think they just started doing this in like 2018 or something, but there's so much research that is either being suppressed or it's not as popular as it could be because it's a freaking swastika, you know what I mean? But it's not like they decided to do this for an aesthetic reason. It has a very functional, practical purpose. But just the fact that this symbol is so imbued with like bad energy from World War II, right? That it's actually slowing scientific progress because of the shape looks bad. It looks like a naughty shape.
Because it's offensive.
Right, it's an offensive shape.
that shows the power of the mind and why psyops are so dangerous, because a particle that's meant to bring probably like some kind of healing or prosperity vibe, because of what happened with World War II and because of the psyop of Hitler and the attachment to that symbol, it brings about the opposite reaction that it's kind of designed to bring about, because of our minds.
Soon as someone
So-
sees that shit, they're gonna automatically think that even if it does bring prosperity to them and their people and their community, whatever culture, whatever country they're in, soon as someone sees it, they're gonna be like, "What the fuck?" You know. So it's.
I think it
you can't
depends.
even-
I feel like that depends.
I mean, well, we do have new research that shows that it actually originated from India, right? And that it actually has more.
Well, ancient Greece too, man. Like the most popular.
I just
Oh yeah,
don't
the
know right
Phoenicians
now.
had that shit, dude. The
Crazy.
Phoenicians
Yep.
had that shit too. So yeah, everybody had that shit for some reason. It had and
Native Americans, I think Hopi Indians had like almost every culture had this. And my favorite example is the Greek patterns. If you look, it usually looks like the little squares that surround the outside of something. But if you remove the outside border and just keep the middle part, it's literally just swastikas. And I think that's where the name Gamadian comes from.
This one,
See that?
right?
see, and you see the one with the arrows, bro. When you're done, scroll back up to the one with the arrows because it just kind of like makes me feel like that's how like
This one?
it's like showing how energy flows. You know what I'm saying? Like.
Yeah, it's a
Pretty
swirl essentially. With
Well, yeah, it's a vortex, and I mean everything that I've been studying is pointing to vortexes being like essential for creation. You know what I mean? That's pretty weird.
Yeah, a lot of the old like 17th century and earlier that talked about what you would probably throw in as like quantum mechanics and entanglement and all that. Almost all of them basically said that reality was born from spirals. That everything came from spirals. A lot of like Rene Descartes' writings talked about spirals being the origin of planets and universes and everything.
Mm-hmm. Now we on to something for sure.
So to bring this back and to get into what I wanted to talk about with you, Thomas, the dark magic thing, like I said, that's almost a result of the psyop that it's, I mean, like if you're raised as a Christian or Catholic where you believe in the devil or Satan, then it's dark magic, it's witchcraft, it's bad stuff, right? But this new term that we've been talking about lately in the cave is spiritual hijacking, right? And that's taking other cultures' spiritual practices and kind of relabeling it and taking ownership of it. And I feel like I said, just to kind of preface how I got into this and why I wanted to talk to you about it, everywhere you go, there's some kind of sex party or sex ritual, right? We talked about Stanley Kubrick. If he's a whistleblower filmmaker, then you got to look into Eyes Wide Shut. And Eyes Wide Shut was about sex parties, right? Jack Parsons
It was
had
about
sex
child
parties.
trafficking specifically.
That too. And then we'll get into that too. Jack Parsons had sex parties because he was inspired by Aleister Crowley, which led to L. Ron Hubbard, who started Scientology, which you could say because of that bridge practices sex magic parties as well. And it's funny how a lot of Hollywood celebrities are tied into Scientology now. And then the Harvey Weinstein stuff came out, Jeffrey Epstein stuff came out, Diddy stuff came out. And I'm just like, man, what if we're just looking at the surface level of this? You know what I mean? What if there's a deeper sex magic practice that Aleister Crowley uncovered in his research, that Jack Parsons was inspired by, that, passed it down? And then I came across the Bach Saga with you. And I'm like, this might be the origin of all that's been bastardized or, lost in translation through telephone. You know what I mean? So let me just preface the Bach Saga with this. What if I told you there was a story that explained real history of everything we know that's passed down by a family orally and uninterrupted? And it's about a boy who ate a mushroom and gained the knowledge of everything. Right? No, that's not the Bach Saga. What if it's about a boy who saw a burning bush that wasn't on fire, but was on fire? That's all believable, right? These are all like biblical stories, an example. But no, the Bach Saga is not about that. It's about a boy who saw aliens and gained knowledge of everything. No, that's not what the Bach Saga is about. But there are religions and cults that practice that, and you can get into a debate with highly intellectual people that will entertain that idea. But the Bach Saga is about a boy who sucked his own dick, drank the cum, and then gained the knowledge of everything. And bro,
he
I
learned the
think-
alphabet immediately.
So what religion is that? I don't know what the fuck is where did
Let's
we
start there, bro.
how did we get from eating mushrooms to eating your own mushroom? Like what the
No,
fuck?
I was just kind of explaining how certain mythological stories of creation and
they be on some weird shit.
a wise, chosen one gains the knowledge and how it's believable, and that story has sprouted different cultures.
Well,
But if
the
you
first
put the
two you
fact that someone
mentioned-
sucked his dick, and like we talked about Jack Parsons, when it comes to sex, everyone's like, "No, man, they can't talk about that shit."
The first two you mentioned, though, the mushroom and the burning bush, I interpret both of those as psychedelics. Like that was somebody that expanded their mind for the first time. And there's the whole stoned ape theory is like a great example of all that one. But when you
Whoa.
talk about like aliens from outer space, maybe if you believe in aliens, then that
That's
also
Aurelian. That's Aurelian belief.
But
Right?
that would give it. Well, I mean, it's ancient alien belief. It's Anunnaki belief. It's
Yeah.
anyone that thinks that the pyramids were built by advanced technology. It's that the same kind of belief. Atlantis, Tartaria,
travelers.
Hollow Earth. All that is essentially in that same category of being like aliens came. Like sometimes the alien is just another hidden culture that's on the planet. Sometimes it's an angel. Sometimes it's an actual alien from outer space. But all three of those, burning bush, mushroom, aliens, that's basically new information that didn't exist before, or at least wasn't accessible. And now all of a sudden it's accessible to us. And it has this extra qualification that it leads to a quantum leap in human intelligence
Mhm.
and productivity. Like those are very tangible things. But then when we say the Bach saga, like I guess I don't understand that original premise, and I'm willing to set it aside and talk about the rest of the mythology for it. But the origin story makes less sense than some of the other, like the Stoned Ape origin story makes way more sense to me than Bach saga, because I just don't see one of the jokes that comes up often, but I think rightfully so, is like, well, that means every porn star is Albert Einstein, right? Because they've all had gallons of this stuff from a variety of different people. So how come they're not the ones that are leading industry right now? How come they're not running Tesla?
Because he was doing sex magic, and you shouldn't be doing that. Could, but you're right. I agree with that. But I was telling a friend while I was researching all this, he was like, do you believe this? I'm like, no, I don't necessarily believe it, but it's interesting, and it lines up with a bunch of current practices that we don't know the origins of, right? And
Well, one of my biggest and I'm not anti-Bach. In fact, I love the Bach saga mythology and all the research that goes into it from people. I think one of my biggest criticisms of it, though, is that it was only revealed in like the late 80s, I believe. And because of that, it's got the advantage that it could have been stewing in Eeyore Bach's mind for decades, and he could have retrofitted everything that he wanted to work into the Bach saga into things that like conveniently filled all these gaps in. So in like an unscientific way, right? Like being unscientific is when you start with your premise and you try and reverse engineer it so that you can create experiments that are set out specifically to prove your ideas right. Like that would be considered somewhat anti-scientific. So the Bach saga has a lot of those kind of traits in my mind, where a lot of it feels like it was engineered to explain a whole bunch of disparate things in very convenient ways, which doesn't mean it's all lies. Like there's still a chance that a lot of it is true, but it makes it highly suspect just because, again, like he had the convenience of 2020 hindsight, whereas almost every other explanation for how the world started, they have to incorporate like everything that's been found and explain a lot of different things out in the open. Like Bach saga was developed in a black box and released, not even 4 decades ago.
what I find,
summarize the Bach saga.
wait,
for
hold
the
on.
viewers
I'll
real
preface it
quick,
with
man.
this too. Let me set this up this way. I like it because it also brings reason to some of the yogi practices. But here's what I'll say about it before I pass it off to you, Thomas. It's interesting because I feel like, first of all, like I said, it is a history story. It's a creation story, right? And I've been listening lately to a podcast, Danny Jones's podcast, and he had Amon Hillman on.
Yeah.
And have you heard of that guy?
He's like fashioned himself as the modern Aleister Crowley in a way, I think.
Some shit. But he was talking about how you guys should check him out, because I'm not going to talk about that here. But since you know about him already, Thomas, it's perfect.
I've reached out. Hopefully I hear back.
No way.
point.
Are you serious? That's dope. That's
I'd have
awesome.
him on.
So he's talking about how the biblical text has almost been, Disney-fied, if you will, right? Like we're getting a lost in translation version of the text, but they were essentially turning people into cups or into a pharmacy, right? They were pretty much putting people under certain conditions that will alter their chemical structure in their body. That'll turn them into a pharmacy where they can extract either blood or semen or some kind of fluid from the body in order to create some kind of psychoactive state or manic state or healing properties, right? Which is interesting. When we had you on, you talked about adrenochrome, and that was also what I referenced when I was hearing that information, was the fact that we are fucking walking fucking drug bins, bro. Like you can get high off me, you know what I mean? Which is crazy.
It would be inefficient though, because that when we talk about adrenochrome, that stems from the fact that adrenaline was one of the first drugs that you could extract from an animal and give it to another animal, and they would have a very direct and predictable effect from it. Before adrenaline was discovered, almost every other drug kind of came from a plant. So it made it stand apart. So then adrenochrome, because it derives from adrenaline, has that same feature that it comes from a person. But in my boring aspect of my research, it does seem way more likely that if you were trying to harvest adrenochrome in mass quantities, you would just go into like the cattle sector and you would just be like, hey, you guys using all this spare adrenaline that you get when you shoot the bolt into the cow's head? Oh, you're not using that? Here, I'll give you this much for it. And now all of a sudden that would become a much easier source than trying to extract it from people, namely because a cow's adrenaline gland is like 4 times the size of a person's, and it would cost way less money to kill a cow than it would be to kill a person. And all the side of, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's just so many reasons why it would be way more profitable and repeatable, and it fits into capitalism better to just use livestock for that. Now, I'm sure there's like private batch you can get out there.
But let's say that there's a religious cult that thinks that nurturing a person in order to be the best pharmacy, if you will yield some kind of chosen fluid, because it not only does it bring psychedelic effects, there's some healing properties as well with the body fluids that can be extracted from people if you put them under certain conditions.
Oh, I believe that's 100%. They used to forge swords in the urine of virgin ginger boys. Like they would act like that would be a highly coveted thing that you could actually sell your pee. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that they could forge swords in it. I think the same thing with like leather and tanneries and stuff. That like some people had more acidic pee, I guess. And I don't know who decided this, or at one point someone was like, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to try and forge my sword in some pee today." But someone figured it out at some point, and these things developed into their own little like myths and lores, to where people were absolutely being harvested for like the substances their bodies were producing.
Which is crazy. So now I bring it back to yoga and why I like boxing, because it goes back to yoga and being a fighter and getting into like boxing and stuff. And we'll talk about boxing too, because that shit was fucking mind blowing. Was the fact that some of these boxers, they do these practices or these training methods where they'll drink their own piss to recycle the nutrients, right? And there's yogi practices that preach that you shouldn't be disgusted by that, because those are your bodily fluids and your body's a temple. So it should be pure. And if you don't think your fluids are pure, then there's something up with you, whether it's your diet, whether it's your energy or something that needs to be worked with holistically. So now to preface the Boss Saga.
Yeah, you're talking about urine therapy, which is like making a comeback all of a sudden.
Yeah. Well, and some of them are exaggerated benefits, but there are some concrete benefits.
I don't know.
of
Being
urine
in
therapy,
dialysis, being a dialysis technician, I could argue against this because there's so many disgusting things that you can find in urine that you would have to filter out. You know, it's pretty gross.
but- well, who would fucking want to drink blood? But if it had like,
I'm talking about urine. Y'all talk about urine and shit.
well, bro, we're about to talk about drinking cum. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to level up to that.
Hey, I mean, there's plenty of people who do that on planet Earth. They're totally fine.
So I guess before I hand it off to you, Thomas, before we just introduce the boss, I wanted to ask: do you think that there was some kind of maybe psychedelic properties to drinking cum based on your research of the Bach Saga that led to these?
I don't know. I
You know
haven't
what I
been
mean?
convinced of that.
Revelations.
I have not been convinced of that. So I've talked to a lot of like hardcore Bachists, like people that actually subscribe to that, follow the teachings of Eeyore Bach. One of them is Michel Merle. Shout out. He was awesome to talk to and very candid, like transparent, didn't hide anything. And the best explanation that I've heard so far, which I think it gets me 20% of the way there, so it's not convincing to me, but it's that imagine if there was never a desire, like you never had to blow a load for any reason because you were already taken care of, because society, like there was a UBI for getting off, right? Like you were guaranteed you would always be getting off constantly whenever you needed to, and there was like no dating scene, there was no societal pressure, like it was just a given that you'd be getting off at some point. Like some guy would come by and he would just suck you off, and that was not something you ever had to worry about. How much more productive would the world be if everyone just became an afterthought? Like you were never thinking like, how am I going to get my dick wet today? If that was never something that anyone had to contend with.
That's
So if that was the premise of the Bach Saga, that gets me 20% of the way there for like a utopian society. But there's so many gaps in that story and so many ways it can falter. Like what if my example when that came up was like, what if one day you wake up and you're like, I don't want vanilla today. You know, I want a chocolate, or I want a steak, or I want to eat that thing over there. I don't even know what it is. It looks good. What if I want to eat that thing? Now it's kind of like UBI. What if someone wakes up and they're like, I don't want $10, I want $20, you know? That's it. At some point, someone won't be happy with the status quo and things change. And one of the other claims of Bach Saga is that it lasted for, some claims is like 500,000 years. I've seen some iterations where they had a utopia for 50 million years. And I just can't fathom a human society that exists without any change for 50 million years. That part is the hardest pill to swallow.
All right. So before I ask any more questions, I guess we should preface it with, for people that don't know, what is the Bach Saga? What the fuck are we talking about right now?
I'm the worst person to intro this, although I've done like a 6.5 hour breakdown of the Bach Saga with Juan on, if you look for a Cult Book Club Bach Saga, there's a 6.5 hour version that we had to get through in order to explain what Bach Saga is. But I'll do my best to give you like a minute or two version of it.
And you should watch it on Rumble. You should watch it on Rumble for sure.
Yeah, don't watch it on YouTube. It's on
Yeah,
YouTube, but it's just all censored, and you can't really tell what the hell we're talking about.
For real.
So the worst Cliff Notes version of this is that a goat and a monkey bang, and they create a brother and a sister human. Like they come out, goat and a monkey have sex, and out of the goat comes a human girl and a human boy. And the human girl and the human boy, once he's at age 7, he drinks from himself. That's the claim of the Bach Saga. And from that moment, understands the alphabet and understands language, and then teaches his sister language. And I believe that when he teaches his sister, it means that she then drinks him. And then they bang each other and have kids, and then they bang the kids, and the kids bang each other. And that's how the world populates itself, was from starts with a goat and a monkey, 2 kids, the kids repopulate the whole earth, which isn't that much crazier than Adam and Eve talk to a snake in a garden, and then you close your eyes and you wake up, and now there's a few hundred people out there, and you're like, don't worry about it. You know, don't worry about where all the people came from. It's sort of a similar strange creation story. Like every creation story requires you to say like, okay, now close your eyes. Okay, now open them. You know what I mean? Like something changes. So that's the version of the Bach Saga. But then after this happens, because the creation story of the Bach Saga has to do with this kid drinking from himself. The rest of their culture revolves around that, to the point where the ultimate play out of this utopian society in Bok Saga was that their military was created around the facilitation of everyone drinking from each other. And that, to simplify it, it would be like if you walked into a convention of scientists and you just blew every scientist in the room, then you had a kid, that your kid would potentially have all the knowledge of all those scientists. It's not that you yourself get smart. You know what I mean? Like you don't blow Einstein and then you're Einstein. But the premise of Bok Saga is if you blow Einstein and then you bang somebody else and get someone pregnant, then maybe Einstein's knowledge or semen makes its way into that kid. And if you repeat that process for thousands and thousands of years, it's essentially like a really kinky version of eugenics, even kinkier than the German version, to where the ultimate aspect of this is that the king and the queen, well, if you buy into this, right, the king's like, well, if I want to have the smartest kid and the strongest kid and I want the perfect kid, then I gotta blow every dude in my kingdom. Like I gotta drink from every single guy just so that I get every good or bad version out there. And the same thing with the women. Everyone talks about the dudes blowing each other in Bok Saga, but the exact same thing happens with women. The women have to drink from each other, or they would basically squirt into these little vases, and then they would pass the vases around and drink from them. So ultimately, the premise is that if the king blows 10,000 guys and the queen drinks from 20,000 women in the kingdom, and then the king and the queen get together and they bang each other for a month straight and they try to have a kid, then that kid would be the cumulative result of 20,000 people, and it would have all the best parts of all 20,000 people in the kingdom. That's essentially the premise of the Bok Saga, and that exact scenario played out for, some claims are 50 million years, and that it was only when people started deviating from this very rigid system that you started getting different races, a lot of different cults. There's a little racist tint to this, but yeah, it's like as soon as the way that I phrase it in the video, as soon as they started letting ugly people bang in the dark, everything went to shit. Like all of a sudden now it's not just the king blowing all the scientists. Now all of a sudden, like, the scientist's dumb younger brother is like banging someone and, getting drunk and banging the barmaid in the middle of the night. And now all of a sudden they just added somebody that's not going to be like, they're not sending their best. You know what I mean? Like they just added something to society. And then if that keeps perpetuating itself, then you lose everything. And I think that's the Bok Saga in a nutshell.
So essentially they're the master race, so to speak, right? Because
absolutely. Yeah.
And they keep it in the family. And I think I looked into it, like, because they procreated under certain astrological conditions, it didn't yield, not just astrological conditions, but certain variables were in play too. It didn't yield to any child with birth defects because everything was pure and it was a paradise timeline at the time, right? And I don't know, I going down into it, the Aryan race and the Scandinavian people and the master race kind of seemed like Hitler was almost trying to usher in the box. You know what I mean?
Maybe, but I think sometimes when people talk about Aryan race and like master race, I just think of like food photography, where like, of course, they never take a picture of like the wilted lettuce or the burger that had like a weird piece of grizzle sticking out the side. Like if you're the one taking the photos and you're the one that wants people to see the photos and you're selling the burger to them, you're never going to show that one of them. So it's kind of like that where everyone's like, oh, the perfect, Nordic race. Like even the Romans, right? Like they would just, if they had a kid and the kid was like missing a finger or had like a cleft palate, you just throw that dude off the edge of a cliff and let nature do its thing. So yeah, they didn't have a lot of remnants of a bunch of like crippled children in wheelchairs because they just throw them to the elements. They would climb up a mountain and just let them be exposed to the elements and basically die of exposure. So like people went about it differently back in the day. And again, when you claim that the Bok Saga could potentially be 50 million years old, like the only person that has any evidence of this was Eeyore Bach, and a lot of it was just storytelling. So there's no remnants of like, and here's a village with proof that, you know, we didn't find anyone that had medical defects. This is a really easy one than just say, oh yeah, and 50 million years ago, where you'll never be able to prove it. Everyone's perfect. And they all had perfect teeth, and nobody ever was born like missing a finger. It's such a wild claim to make without having any sort of real tangible evidence to back those specifics up.
Agreed. Yeah, that's so wild, man. Because, you know, even like not even disclosing like the whole issue of, you know, diseases, sexually transmitted diseases, you know, like that could still it could still come about. You know what I mean? So
especially when you got goats and monkeys up in there, I'm sure there's all kinds of diseases that they're sprouting from that.
Yeah.
So the premise of the theory or the philosophy of autofellatio and all that too was the fact that sperm and semen is magical enough to create humans. So what could it do if you ingest it, right? And going back to my whole the conversation we had about no idea is original, it also brings in semen retention, right? But does it though? Because there's different ways to do it. There's semen retention and there's actually digesting it, right? Like,
and then there's retrograde ejaculation too.
Bro, this
is where all these OnlyFans girls could come in and add to the scientific community. You know, like, let's go ahead and observe y'all doing all this wild shit, and let's run some lab tests. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's take this seriously since y'all want to be out there doing some wild shit anyway. Let's go ahead and observe this scientifically.
That's what I'm saying. When I was watching the 6-hour occult book club you did with Juan, and it's crazy because it started off funny, but then, you know, after 2-3 hours, it wasn't funny anymore. It's actually mind blowing. Pause. But yeah, you guys mentioned fucking porn stars too, taking bukkake and cum shots, and it takes 22,000 people to bukkake into someone to create the first person or something?
Yeah, well, it's 11,000 for the dude and 11,000 for the woman, and so when they get together, it's cumulatively 22,000. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's like 22,002 because at that point, then it's also the king and the queen add their 2 to it.
Sounds like an orgy. But how about this? What specifically what knowledge did he gain when he performed this this spiritual act?
Well, originally was the entire alphabet that the first humans had no way to communicate with each other, just grunts and I guess like pointing at stuff, if even pointing existed, right? The premise is that there was absolutely
so this was the original language that he uncovered through sucking his own.
And the second, and I understand how superficial this explanation is, so it goes deeper than this, but that. Yeah, the 7-year-old drinks from himself and spontaneously gets a download of the entire alphabet, how the alphabet sounds, how to put letters together to form words, written language, like everything just comes together. Pause. From just this one act, right? I mean, that's kind of crazy. Although if you go to the deeper aspect of this one, that the alphabet in the Bach Saga claims is that if you were to sit down and chart the progression of the stars over the course of a year, that every different point that you end up making by tracing certain stars and astrological patterns, those are what creates A, B, C, D all the way through the whole alphabet. So that it might not be that a kid just sat down, drank himself, and knew the alphabet. It might have been like sat down, maybe like multiple generations, maybe hundreds of generations, analyze the stars and put together this alphabet. And then Eeyore Bach at some point was like, hey, I know, we're just going to switch this up a little bit. That seems just as realistic because the compelling aspect of the Bach Saga is on those astrological drawings of the alphabet and some of the explanation behind that.
Now, the language that he was blessed with, is this language the foundation of any other languages that we're currently using? Like,
that's the claim. Yeah. Well, the Bach Saga's the claim is that they were the original everything. They were the origin for all humanity, for language, culture, that everything came from Bach Saga, including just words and the root sources of words. So there's a lot of wordplay that comes up. People that get into etymology. There's a lot of etymology in Box Saga where a lot of it is a little bit stretchy, but it'll be like, oh, this word sounds like this word, so that means they're the same word. You kind of have to buy into that a lot to get deep into the Box Saga and accept it. You have to accept that, oh, if these two words kind of sound the same, that's the same thing. Move on. And there's a lot of the current theories are built upon that kind of logic.
That's kind of the convenient part of the way that it's presented. Like you have to just sit uninterrupted and listen to everything, so you don't have those because I was really thinking about how interesting that method of teaching is, because in one perspective it's like you don't ruin my train of thought while I'm presenting the information, but at the same time, like, the purpose is to teach to the student, so you have to kind of be in a real-time feedback loop with the student to see if he understands the information you're presenting, right? But it's interesting too, because I also think that it's information that you have to take in wholly, pause, before so you can understand the whole idea. You know what I mean? If you're interrupting the story, then it's like you're ruining my flow almost. It's like I'm freestyling and you won't get the product of my freestyle if you interrupt me, opposed to if I'm stopping my freestyle type shit. It won't hit the same sonically, I feel like.
This is one of the harder parts for me to believe the Box Saga, though, is that you have to just sit there and listen to oral lectures for literal decades, and you can't ask questions, and that you can't like stop and start and rewind or any of that. Like what happens if you got a family and you have a kid, and then 2 years later you got another kid, and 2 years later you have another kid, and then all of a sudden you've got 7 kids all spaced out? Does that mean you start the lecture all the way over again? Like, or does someone just hop on and they don't get to hear the first 3 years of the lecture because they were just born a little bit too late? Like, there's so many logistical reasons why it's so hard to believe that this is any way reproducible or scalable, that you could just orally teach someone for 20 years. I just don't. I mean, and I'm just way beyond biased. Like, I couldn't even sit still for 40 minutes, let alone, like 40 months.
Well, it also builds this dynamic of like a cultish environment, a cultish kind of vibe of what this guru is saying is bond, you know what I mean? And I had to listen and respect him when he's talking. And it kind of builds like this kind of social dynamic of a cult. And I feel like, just like the thing that you mentioned, one of the claims I read was by the age of 7, boys had to start drinking their sperm and little girls had to start drinking their sap. It almost sounds like, not necessarily, it almost sounds like the reason for these pedophilia, well, not necessarily, there's some fucked up crazy shit, but the reason that the elites are practicing that, I feel like, you know what I mean? Like what's prefaced in the Basa was, if you see this from the lens of a Catholic or Christian, it's going to look crazy, obviously. But if you see it from the timeline of when cavemen started learning how to talk, they still had to shed those cavemen habits, then it's like, oh, okay, this is like the point in evolution where we started becoming modern. Obviously, we were like, hey, man, maybe we shouldn't be telling these kids to suck their own fucking.
Maybe you shouldn't be sucking my dick in this cave, bro.
There's a non-sexual way that you could go about it, which again makes. This is why I think that it's not as real, right? Because let's say that you wanted to do a modern day Box Saga in 2024. Like, you could just mail it in and be like mail-in voting, but you would just, jerk off into a little envelope and put it in the mail, and it would show up at the White House, and Biden would just sit there and he would drink it, and that would be the whole exchange. But that, again, like, because of the sexual aspect of it, it's not just the fluid, and it almost seems it would be hard to remove like the sexual process from this whole thing. If you were able to take that away and say it's just about bodily fluids, it would somehow be less gross and more acceptable. But there's almost like a performance aspect, and you're talking about like Boxing Day, right? Mm-hmm. Like, Boxing Day was essentially this like long process of public performance, to the point where like general, the 4-star general that you know sucked off all the dudes in his unit, and all the guys in his unit sucked off all the guys in their units, and all the way up. And now the general would have to show up in front of the king, and I would have to perform for the king. Like now, all of a sudden, you gotta make things happen in a really awkward situation with people looking at you. It's important. Like, God help you if you've got some kind of performance anxiety. But again, like that would all be resolved if it was just about the fluids. Then why would they even have to travel around? Like, why couldn't they just store? I guess maybe it has to be fresh. But again, in 2024, they could just send you a little like receptacle that's got dry ice in it or something. Which again, I feel like if it was a real thing, then they would be mandating that. Like you would have to send Joe Biden your semen so he could drink it if it was a real thing.
Man, so interesting. You and Juan went into the etymology of certain words that the Bach Saga claims to have been the reasoning behind the meaning behind those words. I, right, is supposed to represent a penis.
Yeah, because a lowercase I looks like a little dick with a little squirt coming out of the top. That it's it's like very juvenile in a way. Where you just step back and like, that looks like a dick. And that, I guess that was one of the things that you find out if you watch that 6.5 hour episode, that the first hour or two, it's always like, oh, I bet they're gonna say that, you know, the uppercase B is probably like a set of boobs, right? Oh, I bet they're gonna think the J is like a little nutsack or something because it kind of looks. But every time you make one of those jokes and then you get into the Bach Saga, you're like, oh, they really do think that. And it becomes less funny after a while because it's such a predictable pattern. It's just like, oh, that letter looks like a dick. That's definitely a dick. And you're right 100% of the time in Bach Saga. So it almost has got like a middle school mentality to it.
Yeah. You got to have childlike faith, right?
I guess so, yeah. I mean, that's and so the whole reason that the Bach Saga even came onto the radar and why I even care about it at all is because for whatever reason, when I want to say like Americans or people outside of like Finland, like people outside of Eeyore Bach's actual circle, but when you got like these outsiders that find the Bach Saga, for some reason they end up dancing around all this. Like they won't talk about 7-year-old that's drinking from himself and like, you know, what Boxing Day means. Like they'll hint at it and they'll come up with all these fancy like symbolism, and they'll talk about the astrological nature of the alphabet and the precession of the stars, but none of that's really the main story, right? The main story is just all about these fluids and all about like the focus on it. And that the fact that that's the real thing, but no one was talking about the real thing, that's what interested me the most out of all of it.
So you're saying there's a fat community that goes hard on this, huh?
There's a huge community and it's a lot of gatekeeping involved, to where if you read it and you put out a video and you're just like, hey, I just found this thing called the Bach Saga. It's just a bunch of dudes, you know, getting each other off. All of a sudden, like they'll find you and they'll start dropping all these comments, and it's like you're a disinfo agent, or like, and it's surreal because it very obviously is about that, but it's almost like you can't say that in such direct, crass terms. Like you have to also dress it up in some story. But again, that weird requirement and gatekeeping doesn't seem to exist in Eeyore Bach's original circle, and all the like Michelle Merle and a few of the other people that are still around that grew up with Eeyore Bach and went through all this. They're open about it. They'll tell you all about every practice. Like they don't hold back. But like the newcomers, like the weird neophytes, the 20 or 30 somethings that are just finding out about it, usually through some kind of like anti-circumcision MRA backgrounds, you know, they've got like their own agenda, and their agenda happens to align with Bach Saga. And that type of person, they seem to be very defensive about like the real history of all the Bach Saga. So anyways, I find that more fascinating than the Bach Saga itself, that there's all these people that are so into it, but you can't talk about Fight Club.
That's the thing. I feel like that's what I was meaning when I meant that they were building this cult dynamic, because it's like, oh, you really want to know what it is? Like you can't you can't understand the whole story until you go to this like party. You got to go to Diddy's party. He's gonna tell you guys.
Meet me at the
sign this NDA.
Yeah,
like, go to the island. You got to go to the island and Jeff
yeah,
will tell you
exactly.
what's up.
Like, bring your
When you're
siblings.
there, obviously, when you're there, they have like palatial places, right? You're fucking in awe because of where you're coming from, because they almost like pick. Well, if we're talking about the theory that these groomers are practicing some kind of perverted version of the Bok saga, they almost target certain vulnerable people. You know what I mean? And when you're there, it's like you see these celebrities, and you're like, damn, I guess I'm in. You know, and from there, it becomes less of a placebo practice and more of blackmailing. If all of this shit's just kind of hoopla, ritualistic shit, you know what I mean?
See, I tend to again get boring when you get into the real nitty gritty, because like the things that I truly believe that explain this stuff are usually more pragmatic. So like I think that there's way more of a chance that the people that get swindled into going to the island are going all in on Bok saga to the point where they end up going to an island that really there's just somebody recording you and selling the tapes for blackmail in the future, and that that entire business. That business model, if you're into like recording people doing weird kinky stuff in order to blackmail them later, it's very lucrative. And it's also like you're constantly looking to like, how can we improve our technology? How can we make this more appealing and better? So your whole game is to convince people like, oh, this isn't weird at all. Like the normies think this is weird, but look, Kevin Spacey was here just yesterday. Look at the mess that he left. And you open the door and there's like body parts and stuff all over the room. And you're like, oh crap. Well, I guess if it's good enough for Kevin Spacey, then, you know, what I want to do isn't that weird. And I think that it's all about that normalization at these like really high levels, but it's never normal. And everybody knows deep down that it's not normal. So then when they find out like, oh, what do you mean that I was being recorded? What do you mean that you've got hours of me doing these weird things? That feels like it would have way more magical potency than like the act itself. Like if I record you and I've got it on video and I can use it to destroy your life and your legacy,
it's the insurance, bro.
Way more, dude. That feels way more magical power than anything you'd get out of that little twink that you paid, you know, 20 grand.
You become Count Dracula. You my cattle now. I could.
It's like this. It's like this. Hey, suck your own dick and you will have the knowledge. Oh, you don't have the knowledge? Well, I got a video of you sucking your own dick, and I'll give you the success. You just have to follow this blueprint, you know, and you know you can't tailor or alter the blueprint. It is what it is. You're a slave now.
and I also think that when you talk about like, let's say the type of person that gets invited to the island, or the type of person that gets invited to the Marina Abramovic, you know, spirit cooking parties where they're rubbing their shit and their blood on the walls or whatever. Like when you find yourself in those situations. And here's some of my bias coming out, and it'll be a little bit flippant, but it's if you are such a titan of industry or politics or some think tank, I kind of believe that it would be super rare to be a true Renaissance person where like you're an expert in all things to all people, like, you know, Leonardo da Vinci style. I think that it's probably way more realistic that you might be a great politician or you might be a great, scientist or whatever, but you probably suck at a bunch of other stuff because you've devoted so much of your life to becoming such a great expert or specialist in this one field. So if that were the case, then they just find all these people that are like really high up in all these different respective fields. And this is just like the original Illuminati kind of work, that if you've got all those people under blackmail, now you've got the best Google search engine in the world. If a question ever comes up, you can search your little black book and all the people that are under your thumb for the answer to anything, and then look like you're the one that had the answer, because no one's going to be like, oh yeah, Epstein called me up and he asked me this thing, so I told him, because they would know like, well, why would you talk to him? Why would you give him that kind of information? So it's just like the oldest trick in the book, but it just preys on something that people will never be able to avoid. And again, to go back into the realistic nature of the Bok saga, if you eliminated anyone from ever even thinking about wanting to go to the island because all their needs are always provided for, then maybe you would have more geniuses walking around. But I don't think we would ever know because it doesn't seem possible.
True. That's true. So, based on your research, just to cap this off, what are some facts that have actual evidence that you've uncovered from the Bach saga? What are some stuff you believe?
The astrological alphabet design, which gets really complicated, but basically the premise is that you follow the procession of stars on a piece of graph paper and you chart it out and you draw, you get a little compass and you draw the angles. That, even if it were retrofitted, is very spectacular. Like it's really, really cool. It's probably my favorite aspect of all this. There's also claims that there's buried treasure and all sorts of buried artifacts. And I believe that a couple things Eeyore Bach did point out, and they excavated it and they found it. So he does have a decent track record, at least from the publicized findings. And it was kind of things that people were like, how the hell would you know? So it reminded me almost of like Joseph Smith when Mormonism first started. And he's like finding treasure left and right. And that becomes part of his backstory, is that, he had angels that were telling him where to find treasure. So all these different creation stories usually require a prophet that has performed some sort of miracles. So Eeyore Bach does have some of those under his belt, but I think those are some of the more credible aspects of it.
Man. So it's crazy too, because, we were talking about these sex magic parties, and there's obviously Tantra, which probably has a lot of, more information with sexual energy. It's because I ran into this, and this kind of piqued my interest because while I was doing this Dragon Ball Z deep dive, I didn't know how much sex magic is tied into Dragon Balls. I mean, guys, Dragon Balls, like a dragon's ball, you know what I mean? And one of the popular characters is Master Roshi, and he's like a pervert, horny dude, but he never gets any pussy, right? And it's interesting because he's one of the strongest person, and he's old as fuck. And it's because he does semen retention and like transmute this horniness and makes it powerful instead of, wasting himself, so to speak. So I felt like there is something with sexual energy and there is some kind of sexual magic, tantra, yoga type shit. You know what I mean? I thought I hit the end of the wall with Bach Saga.
Absolutely, man.
Thought I hit the wall with the Bach Saga. I thought that was it, but maybe I need to go to China and the Eastern mythology to find out more.
Think about it this way too, right? Like the e-commerce on the internet was basically spawned from adult content, like PayPal and online credit card processing. None of that would have had the same meteoric rise if it weren't for adult content that kind of like spearheaded that entire movement. And if you were to apply that same concept, let's say it was a black magician, right? It was like some Thelema member that was part of this. It was Golden Dawn members that got together and developed, all the porn sites originally. They're literally converting sexual energy into money and then being able to use that money to enact real change in the world. So in that case, there really are, organizations of rich people, elites, that are taking sexual energy and converting it into energy for their own mean. Like they're turning it into gold, like actual alchemy in so many steps, right? Like that's a real thing that's happening. So I believe that that's just as magic as any kind of Eeyore Bach Saga aspect. Now they don't got to go door to door. They just have you go to their website and put a credit card in, and that becomes the new way of like, milking you for your loosh.
Yeah. It's interesting too, being a fight fan. Some fighters don't have sex before fights because it brings them more vigor or some kind of more, more ki, more chi. Yeah,
put them on the hunt, like because when you have semen retention, then your body you're under the impression that it has not fulfilled its motif, which is to procreate, right? That's why when you kind of have like that clarity after you hit it, you like, oh, I'm chilling now, and
the VR comes off.
Yeah, what I'm saying. But when you ain't been hitting, you like a wild beast in the outback, you just anything goes,
You put the VR on, it don't matter, bro.
You're tapping into like the genetic programming. You're exactly right. So like when you hit that reward spot, it's you telling your primal brain of like, oh, we're good, bro. Like there's nothing to worry about. Like just chill. Like everything that you're designed to do just happened. So now we can take a day off. But if you're not doing that and you're doing retention, then you're really telling your animal brain like you got to do what you were meant to do, and that in itself makes you hungry in a way.
Yeah. So the semen retention and like not eating until you're full, like
fasting.
Fasting and stuff like that. Those are the things that make you a monster, bro.
Some breathing techniques too, and certain extreme temperature,
ice baths, cold showers, hot yoga, all that stuff.
Well, crazy enough, Amon Hill was talking about how torture could bring about certain, you know what I mean, chemical reactions too that will affect your
talk about masochists. That's a masochism right there.
Well, going back to adrenaline and all that, that could be why they would induce that.
Well, that's an extreme example for sure. There's also some people that they could literally eat an apple and start tripping nuts. Like the folic acid that's in an apple can react to some people as a precursor, and it just sends their body into overload, and they essentially have the equivalent of like an LSD trip where their body's getting flooded with all these neurotransmitters. And if they just don't eat apples, then they don't go through that. So, like, it would probably be harder to pinpoint that person. Like, see, torture comes in. Torture is way more universal. Like, if you can figure out a way to make torture work for one person, you can almost guess it would have similar effects on everybody. And it's not just an anomaly. If anything, the anomalies would present themselves as the people that would be resistant to it or that didn't act the same way as everybody else.
Damn. So before we get off Bach Saga, semen retention, is that of the Bacchus way or is that something else?
That's a good question, actually. I almost think that would be like hoarding your gold. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like this is like they come to your door. They're like, all right, bud, we need you to come into this bucket.
You ain't paid your taxes.
And yeah, bro. And you're like, I'm a little empty. I can't perform. I almost feel like that would be you not paying your taxes. Yeah, they might beat you up for that.
What if you were infertile, bro?
Well, it wouldn't. I don't know. That's a good question.
I mean, you're useless.
You just get thrown off the cliff, dog.
See, that's the part that I think that doesn't come up in the Bach Saga officially anywhere. But in the back of my mind, as I read that whole thing, I'm always thinking ... or else. You know what I mean? It's like, everyone gathers in the square and they come into the shield and then they drink from their neighbor ... or else they get thrown off the cliff. Like that's the part that they don't talk about.
Damn. Well, just to bring Oris up to speed, I went on the Reality Czars with Thomas and Nate, and Thomas told me that when he was a kid, he used to take the Eucharist from fucking communion and put him in his mouth and save him, and at home he'd try to build Jesus.
So Thomas is Jesus. I did experiments.
Thomas is down, pretty much what I'm saying. So since Thomas is down. You went in this rabbit hole.
I was like 8 years old, and I was like doing science experiments with the body and blood of Christ.
I mean, yo, bro, that's lit. That's all, I mean, you're pushing the boundary. You're asking questions, man. That's what people are supposed to do. So,
well, speaking of pushing the boundaries, I wanted to ask you, since you did the deep dive in Bach Saga, did you try to drink your own fluid?
No, not on purpose. It just kind of happened that way.
That's hilarious, man. Yo, so I'm not gonna lie. When I uncovered urine therapy, I was vegan at the time, so I was heavily vulnerable to psyops. It was sprouted because of a documentary I watched on Netflix, and I was like, man, we can't be killing these animals. So I went vegan for a year, and I went down this rabbit hole of being a yogi and all that, and I uncovered urine therapy and all this shit. And I'm not gonna lie, I put a little bit of pee in some of my, smoothies and stuff just to see if there were any subtle benefits. And I can't say any. It's so tiny, it's so subtle that I don't even know. At the same time, at the time I was doing Xanax, drinking, smoking weed, and everything. So who knows? You know what I mean?
You need to go in, bro. Use it to chase a shot.
I don't know, man. This Bach Saga thing. You think a little drop of semen can gain some sort of subtle wisdom that's
I don't think at
noticeable?
all. I don't think that it can transfer wisdom at all. I might
the only time I would not judge a man for drinking his own semen is if it was during sexual intercourse with his lady. That's probably the only time I will ever accept
the
that
old
it even,
snowball technique.
that it ever even got
That-
close to you. That's the only time I would ever accept that it even got close to you, bruh. Is if that was your lady. Y'all, and that's it, man. But
On some oops
even
shit
that is like for me. I'm like, yo, yo. I don't know,
with
man.
it.
You're gonna have to put me in a different culture, rewrite my whole fucking synopsis and all types of shit for you to fucking make me kind of, that's
Wow.
crazy.
Wild stuff, man.
Yeah. I mean the urine I could see more reasonable because I mean shit, there's people who drink urine because of the lack of water that, so
Well, and
like,
also like you're gonna be peeing like 4 or 5 times a day, even if you don't want to, right? Like it's just gonna happen. But the inverse is not true. Like you're not, unless you got something like really hot going on, right? But you're not just like, oh, it's time to come again.
yeah,
You just go to the bathroom.
like, that's kind of out there. That's the I
Like,
think
it's
like,
active versus passive. So I could see people being more receptive to urine therapy just because it's like, it's right there. Like if it's on your mind and you keep seeing yourself peeing, you're like, it's just going to nowhere anyways. You know what I mean?
yeah, and it's just because there's more of it. You can actually extract liquid from it, like actual water from it, because that's essentially what a good portion of it is.
Liquid gold.
A lot of it is urea, right? So you got to take the urea out because that shit's harmful for you, and you got to take out some of the excess electrolytes because if that stuff stays in your system, you get all kinds of acidosis. You got a lot of bad shit that happens to you basically because it goes through your whole circulatory system. Your circulatory system interacts with each organ. So, you have to be careful with what you ingest in general.
Yeah, there's a reason why your body's expelling some of that. You know what I mean? And it's not because it wanted everything.
Correct. You have nephrons that are in your kidneys that are filtering out certain aspects of the fluids that you're drinking. And the excretion is the byproduct of that. So you have to do some real chemistry in order to make that a viable drinking source. But with that said, it's still more realistic than fucking drinking your own sap.
But see, there's so many other, like, let's say that you were like a high performance, whatever, you're a high performance fighter. The list of things that you could do to improve your health and your knowledge and anything, like that's a long list. And for semen and urine to find their way up into the number 1 and number 2 slot, it's almost like you wanted those to be in the number 1 and number 2 slot. Like really, you didn't look into like, taurine or creatine or like some extra whey protein or like nothing, none of the nootropics. You were just like, yeah, urine needs to go up there. I'm trying urine next. At a certain point, like there's like, it's curiosity, I think, more than it's anything else. It's the same thing as like a 4-year-old. Like, I wonder what that tastes like. You know what I mean? I think there's a big aspect of that to it, and science goes out the door.
Oh, dear
First week of training, we're gonna drink some pee, guys. We're not gonna work out or warm up. Nah.
Shit.
That's gotta set you up.
You can't dilute it?
Being in the military, I almost feel that if there was something to this, the military would know that it was a real thing, that urine therapy was a real, and they would just straight up make you drink everybody's pee while you were in the military because they want the absolutely like most tip-top shape fighting force they could possibly have. And
they
if that
explain that shit, yeah, they just gonna make you do it.
They just make you do it, and it wouldn't be no social faux pas about it. You know what I mean? Like if they can make you kill somebody, then everything's on the table. So it's the same thing. I know it sounds tangential, but it's the same thing with like ghosts and stuff. Like I'm more on the fence with Bigfoot. I think Bigfoot could potentially be out there, but ghosts, it was wild that the number of ghost sightings went down as more people have like cameras and everything. And I almost feel like it's in like this same kind of realm that like we live in a capitalist society. So if there was just one ghost out there that was willing to be filmed for TikTok shorts, then there would be some dude printing money out there making billions of dollars on the only ghost TikTok. You know what I mean? And
Casper,
for that same reason, that like they can't just all be being suppressed. The military, if there was something to, maybe there's something to semen retention, because they do make you drink like saltpeter in the military so that you can't get hard. So maybe they're forcing semen retention. But if there was anything, the urine therapy, I absolutely believe that the military would just force you to drink your own pee in boot camp.
Mm-hmm. They turn you guys into pin cushions, so all kinds of vaccines and shit. So I mean, why not? You drinking piss too, man. Get to drop down and give me 20, you fucking dickhead, and drink this piss.
Yeah, so seriously, what if it was like, hey, you're going to either go and dig a ditch, you're going to go fill sandbags for 2 hours, or you're going to drink your pee? At a certain point, people are going to be like,
I'm just
filling up sandbags anymore,
I'm just drinking this. That's what they thinking, bro.
That's hilarious, man. What a fucking crazy episode. Well, Thomas, tell us about your comic coming up, man.
What a transition. I've got a whole bunch that are coming up. The one that's on right now is nasacomic.com. It stands for Never a Straight Answer. It's a 40-page comic about Stanley Kubrick directing the moon landings, and it's deep with Stanley Kubrick and conspiracy inside. So we were talking about Eyes Wide Shut and like these weird sex orgies of the elites. That's in there. All the fake NASA moon landing theories are in there. Recording over the tapes is in there. There's a lot of inside jokes, and there's also lots of references to all of Kubrick's movies. Barry Lyndon and again, like Eyes Wide Shut and Full Metal Jacket, Spartacus. Every single little weird theory or nuance that I think you've ever heard about Stanley Kubrick or the Apollo missions, I'm pretty sure it's all in this book. Like, it's the ultimate love letter to conspiracy theorists and Stanley Kubrick fans. So if you want to get a copy right now at nasacomic.com, there's a whole bunch of like exclusives. There's like a foil cover and variant covers and patches and stuff. If you're listening to this in the future, or like in a month from now and the campaign's not on, you can still probably go to nasacomic.com and get a copy of the main cover. So no matter when or where you're listening to this, if you go to nasacomic.com, it's the best way to get your hand on a copy of it.
Damn, there you go. Honestly, check it out. It's got everything. This is one of the rare conspiracy content creators that make comic books and is really sick with it with the animation. So check it out, paranoidamerican.com. Let's sign out with some rapid questions. Reese and I are going to shoot up some questions and just answer them first thing in mind. Favorite comic?
X-Men.
Okay.
Favorite Marvel villain?
Mr. Sinister.
Oh, yeah, very underrated.
He's pretty.
How about favorite movie?
Eyes Wide Shut, Clockwork Orange.
Okay. Power Rangers, yes or no?
A 4 out of 10.
Okay.
So we'll say no.
All right, I want to know this. Top 3 rappers, bro.
Oh man, so I can't go with the first one that came to my head. I have to think about this one, but Shaheem, Big L, and Master Ace.
Oh shit! Shout out for Master Ace, man. Seasons is one of my favorite songs.
3 foreign countries:
Iran, Iraq, and Greece.
Okay, cool.
Last one. Favorite conspiracy?
MK Ultra, easy.
All right, yeah, I'm digging that.
All right, well, we'll sign off with the NASA comic. This is the Cave Podcast. Check us out at cave.com. That's K4V3.com. Signing out. Peace out, guys.
Ready for a cosmic conspiracy about Stanley Kubrick, moon landings, and the CIA? Go visit nasacomic.com.
nasacomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com. Oh, nasacomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on. That's why we're singing this song about NASAcomic.com. Go visit NASAcomic.com. Go visit NASAcomic.com. Yeah, go visit NASAcomic.com.
Never a Straight Answer is a 40-page comic about Stanley Kubrick directing the Apollo space missions.
Yeah, go visit NASAcomic.com.
This is the perfect read for comic, Kubrick, or conspiracy fans of all ages. For more details, visit nasacomic.com.